Hush now, lost one. Come closer. I have waited long for one who listens in silence. You arrived in moonless hours, with candle trembling and mind unshuttered. That is good. That is how one begins. Now, before we descend, you must perform. The rite of remembrance. Press your mark below, leave the hour and place you entered this whisper, so the others may find their way. Subscribe to silence. Comment your coordinates. It is the only safeguard left. And so, beneath the worm-eaten desk of Woolsthorpe Manor, long after the apple fell and the quill stilled, a drawer warped by time slid open with a sigh that wasn't wood. The air exhaled mildew, candle soot, and something older. It was there, nested in a fold of rotted linen, that a letter wrapped in red thread waited for centuries. No ink bled through the seal, but the parchment beneath pulsed warm when touched, as though veins of forgotten thoughts still beat within. You lift it. The wax is stamped not with a crest, but a sigil. 7 circles surrounding a blind sun. A heatless hum escapes your lips before you even read it. And on the back, in Newton's unmistakable hand, a trembling line. For no eyes but the 7th. You break the seal, as all doomed do. The ink inside is dark and clotted, stinking faintly of vinegar and rust. Each letter curves in pain, the calligraphy of one who does not wish to remember what he records. Newton writes of a book never meant for light, whose words warp under flame or sun. He speaks of sibilantia somnia, the hissing dreams, and recounts how he discovered mention of it not in any library, but while decoding Ezekiel's wheels through a cipher drawn from the orbits of Jupiter's moons. This was no madman's invention, for on the same page he includes diagrams. Perfect alchemical wheels, drawn with a hand trained in celestial mechanics. They are not symbols, they are engines. Rotating one upon the other, they form a lock that hums in your spine. The letter ends abruptly, not in ink, but in silence. No sign-off. Just a streak down the page as if the pen was yanked by an unseen force. Yet, something else is there. When held against flickering candlelight, only candlelight, a faint map emerges, traced in something that glistens like fish-scale dust. It depicts no land you know. The compass rose points downward. At its heart is Woolsthorpe, but buried beneath it, a sigil and the word cadaverum. That word is Latin, yes, but not as you know it. The root is cado, to fall. Newton meant more than just corpse. He meant that which has fallen beyond resurrection. Obscure fact, the desk in Newton's childhood. Home was reportedly built from oak beams repurposed from a raised church near Grantham, dismantled during Cromwell's dissolution of superstitious sites. Forbidden belief, that words, when written in blood that remembers, iron gall ink made with human bile, carry the essence of the author's soul and can awaken after death. Unsolved mystery, why Newton, whose writings on alchemy and theology were vast, never once mentioned this letter or the sigil again, though the same 7-circled symbol appears carved on the underside of his telescope and scratched faintly into the corner of his Principia Mathematica. Now, let us turn the first page. The page breathes as you turn it, curling slightly at the corners like a burned leaf. The ink within the letter has thickened over time, as though refusing to dry completely. It smells wrong, not of age, but of wet iron and something sweeter. Newton notes, almost with regret, that the letter had to be written with the bile of the lamb, rendered in vinegar, mixed with crushed galls and dried marrow. He warns the reader not to copy the contents, for once the blood letter is writ twice, it begins to speak. You feel it, the heat in your fingers, the tightening of skin around your temples. The words are not passive. They do not wish to be seen by anyone unmarked. But you are marked, aren't you? By curiosity, by the desire that rots the wise. In the folds of the parchment, a single pressed hair is trapped, coiled like a question mark, translucent, golden. A remnant perhaps of Newton himself, or something else. He writes of the cursed book as a book that hungers for vision, feeding off the eyes that try to make sense of its pages. It rejects torchlight, extinguishing flame with every glance. Only the faintest, coldest twilight will coax its ink to rise. Newton's own attempt to read it by candle left him temporarily blind, he claims. He awoke hours later with the candle burned down to the wick, eyes raw, and the walls around him etched in spirals he could not have carved. But worse was the ink. It had bled, he writes, bled from the page and dripped into my lap like remorse. There is mention, too, of a test. Newton buried a copy of one verse from the cursed book beneath the floorboards of his study, a single page, and waited. Within a week, the rats had chewed through 3 feet of stone to reach it. Within a month, the bees in the garden refused to cross the threshold. Within a year, moss grew in patterns that no botanist could explain. It whispers to the inarticulate, Newton scrawled in the margins, and the dumbest of life listens loudest. The page had to be burned, and even that took time, and recitations from the Psalm of Unbinding, found not in any Christian Bible, but copied from a Coptic tomb in the sands near Karga. He never revealed who gave him the original text, but he alludes to a letter, older than his own, which he burned out of fear. The words moved, he confesses, when read aloud. His own ink began to clot the moment he referenced that text. "This I know," he writes in the final lines of this page. "The book cannot be transcribed. Each attempt is a replication of sin, and the sin grows deeper with each echo. The implication is clear. The cursed book is not read. It reads back." Obscure fact: Newton experimented with multiple ink recipes, some including mercury and dissolved bone ash, recorded in unpublished notes catalogued only in 1947 by Cambridge archivists. Forbidden belief. Some medieval scribes held that ink, if made from a martyr's blood, could write prophecy unwillingly, even writing by itself when left undisturbed under a waning moon. Unsolved mystery. A 1683 letter to Robert Boyle, thought lost, where Newton may have referenced an unopenable folio of perpetual night. The original has never been found, though Boyle wrote in reply, "I know the book of which you speak. You are not wrong to fear it." The letter now trembles faintly in your hands, as if remembering the name it dares to speak next. Newton, whose rational mind bent the stars into calculable order, wrote with trembling reverence of another mind, not a peer, but a predecessor. "The book came from D," he whispers in ink, "but not by his hand. It was the apprentice, the warped one, the firewalker. He took what should not have been taken from Prague, and the pages have never forgiven him." The reference is unmistakable. Edward Kelly, alchemist, necromancer, forger, and as some whispered, something less than human by the end. Newton claims that the cursed book, Sibilantia Somnia, was once housed in a sealed codex, bound in serpentine skin, within Dee's private library. Not the royal collection, but the secret one, the library that vanished after the sacking of Prague in 1620, when mercenaries looted the castle's arcane repositories. Most of Dee's known books were recovered, but not all. Newton identifies a single folio listed only in a burned inventory, as De Somnis Sibyllae in Lingua Ignota in Forma Daemonis. He suggests that Kelly, whether by theft or delusion, fled with it into the ash and ruin. A brief, curious note follows. He returned with neither tongue nor teeth, but bearing prophecies scrawled upon the inside of his own skin. You blink and find yourself rereading the same line, over and over, yet never quite understanding the words. They twist, not by grammar, but by implication. Newton writes of Kelly's final dwelling, a cell carved into a monastery wall. Outside Olomouc, where the apprentice was said to sleep without breath for 3 days at a time, muttering backward into a bowl of water. Visitors claimed the air around the cell was heavier than stone. A Czech monk later wrote that the walls bled resinous tears during Mass. When Kelly's body was discovered, scalded and bent backward over the altar, the cursed book was missing. But Newton believes it never left the cell. "The book burrows," he writes. "It does not need to be carried." How did Newton come upon this knowledge? The letter offers no answer, only a final, shaky annotation scrawled vertically across the page's edge. "I found the cipher on a page of D's. The book remains under stone, but its dream has crossed the channel." Then, a symbol. The same 7 circles, but this time, the blind sun weeps. Beneath it, Newton adds a last phrase. "If the Sibyl dreams you, burn your name." You do not know what it means, not yet, but something in your chest begins to ache, as though something old within you has just remembered being hunted. Obscure fact: Edward Kelly was imprisoned in the Hradčany Castle Tower by Emperor Rudolf II, who believed he had contacted angelic beings through the Enochian language, but official records of his death are inconsistent and, in some, missing altogether. Forbidden belief: in certain occult traditions, dreams are not personal experiences, but communal echoes of books yet unwritten. Living manuscripts that dream through hosts. Unsolved mystery: the true contents of Dee's lost Prague manuscripts, specifically a codex described as impossible to index by 17th century librarian Johannes Keplerus, remain undiscovered despite multiple expeditions and Vatican inquiries. The letter's fibers grow colder as you progress, each word carved deeper into the page as though Newton pressed the quill harder to ward off what clawed at his thoughts. He speaks now of a night of rituals, not in Cambridge, but in an unnamed field, beneath the withered scythe of the moon. It was there, under that sickle of lunar decay, that he first saw the title, not in ink, but in breath. The cursed book, he writes, refused all earthly attempts to name it. It would not answer to quill or tongue, only to the utterance beneath. Utterance, that which is neither spoken nor written, but exhaled between. And it came forth, revealed not on parchment, but in frost, upon a mirror chilled by moonlight. Sibilantia somnia, hissing dreams. He had performed the rite of the pale bloom, a fringe ritual lost in alchemical debris, which required moon ash harvested from burned priest robes and the breath of a dreaming dog. The steps are outlined with terrible precision. First, a silver basin filled with water from a spring where no birds sing. Then, the ash of an ecclesiastical garment mixed with clove and saltpeter. Next, the recitation of a phrase found scratched into the walls of a condemned cell in the Tower of London. Noli tangere nisi somniat. Do not touch unless it dreams. Finally, a sliver of Newton's own fingernail dropped into the basin at the stroke of midnight. When the surface broke, it didn't ripple. It screeched. From the shriek came silence. From silence, condensation. And there, in reverse script, formed upon the mirror's frozen surface, the name of the book. A name that had not been spoken aloud for 2 centuries. He never attempted that ritual again. Not because it failed. It succeeded too well. The morning after, Newton awoke to find the word etched into his ceiling in mildew, as if the rafters themselves had whispered in the night. He tried to erase it, but the more he scrubbed, the clearer it became. In the end, he sealed the room and slept in his study instead. His final note on the event reads, "The name now knows me. I do not dream. It dreams, and I am only the echo." He adds one final warning, almost illegible due to the slant and tremor of the ink. "You cannot seek it without moonlight, but the moonlight does not serve you. It serves the page." And beneath that, the seal once more. 7 circles, this time with one cracked and a moth drawn faintly beside. You realize this isn't annotation, it's infestation. Obscure fact: several 17th century occult manuscripts reference the Ritus Lunaris Flammae, a moonlit rite believed to activate dormant pages, but none describe it with such precision as Newton's secret letter. Forbidden belief: certain Rosicrucian sects held that books were spirits bound in paper, and could only be awoken by lunar rituals mimicking their original bindings in astral realms. Unsolved mystery: a burned parchment fragment found in the Bodleian Library's restricted vaults bears a spectral watermark. A mirror, flanked by moths, inscribed with reversed Latin, Somnia scribunt oculi. The eyes write dreams. The deeper you read, the less the world outside matters. The candle does not flicker now. It holds still, as if the flame itself leans in to listen. Newton writes of his first successful translation, or what he believed to be a translation, of a single line from Sibilantia somnia. It was not a coherent phrase, not at first. It did not speak in logic, he writes, but in undoing. Each glyph undoes the meaning of the last, such that to read is to forget what was read, and worse, what was known before. He refers to the script as pre-Adamic, older than Babel, older than speech, a language woven in breath and absence, whose letters hunger not for sound but for memory. He describes drawing a single glyph onto parchment with bone ink, then meditating upon it. By the third day, I could not recall the face of my mother. By the seventh, I could no longer recognize my own name in correspondence. Newton abandoned the experiment only when he discovered the glyph had copied itself, faintly, onto the insides of his eyelids. I closed my eyes and saw it glowing, opened them and saw it again in the wood grain. It followed. That glyph, he adds, was later discovered by a friend, possibly Halley, who described it as a pattern that felt like forgetting. The friend died shortly thereafter, brain fever. But Newton knew this was no disease. It was hunger. The letters, he realized, were living things. Not metaphorically, but truly. Each was a parasite of thought, drawing sustenance not from flesh, but from the architecture of reason. They feast upon logic and leave in its place echoes. He refers to these as Gnostic larvae, and warns that those who read more than a few lines become unable to distinguish dream from doctrine. Whole passages of the cursed book are written in what he calls syllables of vanishing, meaning the more they are understood, the less the reader remembers the world that taught them how to read. He includes a page of sketches, not of glyphs themselves, but of the residue they leave. Spirals, pits, knotted loops that seem to draw the eye inward. You have seen something like them before, perhaps in dreams, or perhaps in the margins of an old Bible, the parts you never quite noticed. One image in particular pulls at your thoughts. A spiral with 13 turns and a small ink blot at its center. Beneath it, Newton writes, "This one consumes names." Obscure fact. In 1705, Newton reportedly spoke for over an hour in a dead language no scholar could identify, during a fevered episode that coincided with the lunar eclipse. Forbidden belief. Some Eastern monastic sects believed that divine language was never meant to be learned. It was a virus, and memory was its incubation. To speak, it is to surrender one's soul's architecture. Unsolved mystery, a 19th century Cambridge notebook references a Newtonian alphabet that was never found, supposedly detailing symbols capable of erasing conceptual categories, such as identity, grief, and time. You read now with caution, but not hesitation. Curiosity is no longer your own. It is something fed into you by the pages. The words drink you as you drink them. Newton's handwriting grows frantic in this section, the lines jagged, pressed so hard into the parchment they sometimes tear it. He speaks not of reading, but of watching. Of constructing a mirror by dark lunar method, a looking glass, ground from obsidian shards found in the ruins of an abbey well beneath the earth, mixed with powdered bone and oiled ash. It was not meant to reflect form, but origin, the place from which the book watches us. He buried the mirror beneath the orchard in Woolsthorpe, under the roots of the gnarled apple tree, after it showed him what he called the architect, without shape. He does not describe it directly, only what it does. The mirror did not reflect light, but time uncoiled. My father walked backwards through the fruit, and my cradle filled with ash. Newton confesses he feared the glass had become a gate. For 7 nights it whispered beneath the floorboards, a brittle, papery sound like turning pages with dry skin. He doused the area with holy oil, sealed it in lead, and sketched the 7-circle seal over the roots. It still dreams beneath. The tree, he writes, and the tree no longer grows apples, only blossoms, even in frost. There is a map, rough and trembling, showing the layout of the orchard. At the center is a symbol, not of a mirror, but an eye with no pupil. He notes that he fashioned the mirror in secret, using fragments of a mirror gifted to Queen Elizabeth by John Dee. Where the fragments came from, he does not say, but he implies that their origin was not of this earth. He writes of feeling watched while forging it, not just observed, but remembered by something ancient. "I saw the memory of the glass remembering me," he scrawls. "That is when I understood the mirror was not mine." The burial itself was ritualized. He fasted, bathed in silence, and recited from an untranslated Aramaic scroll he claims to have found stitched into the spine of a Jesuit codex, a scroll which began with the words, "He who opens light must first close sight." After burying the mirror, Newton noted that his dreams stopped entirely for 13 nights. On the 14th, he awoke with blood in his mouth and a small shard of obsidian in his palm, inscribed with a symbol he had not carved. He does not say what became of it. Obscure fact. Newton's orchard still exists in Woolsthorpe. In 2012, ground-penetrating radar revealed an anomalous buried object beneath the oldest tree, but excavation was forbidden due to historical preservation laws. Forbidden belief. In some alchemical sects, black mirrors are not tools of scrying, but organs. Artificial eyes that belong to an entity that once saw the beginning of time and has not closed its vision since. Unsolved mystery. A fragment of Dee's black mirror, long thought lost, was recovered by the British Museum and later removed from display after staff reported recurring nightmares of mirrors growing inside walls. The candle sputters now, but not from wind. There is no wind. It sputters as if reluctant to bear witness. Newton's letter shifts. The voice is no longer merely that of a man in fear, but one who believes, or hopes, that the horror can be harnessed. If a book can consume, then it can be bound, he writes. If angels fall, they can also be trapped. He speaks of a diagram, not one preserved in any of his published work, but found scrawled on the reverse of a sermon pamphlet, hidden inside a psalter belonging to his uncle. A star pentacle within a golden spiral, overlaid with lunar curves, the mathematics not of gravity, but of intention. Newton believed he had discovered the geometry of containment, not for spirits, but for the seraphic intelligences that whisper through cursed texts. He called it divine conjugation, and wrote that angels, true angels, were not winged men, but forces, calculations with will, inhabiting light and thought simultaneously. The cursed book, he postulated, did not summon demons. It attracted unclaimed equations, fragments of divine mind cast adrift after Babel or Eden, looking for hosts. They complete themselves through language, he wrote, and the reader becomes the host organ. His goal was not exorcism, it was containment. He drew 7 concentric circles, each representing one of the sacred refractions of awareness, an idea borrowed from Kabbalistic numerology, and fused with his own reflections on the corpuscular theory of light. In the center, he placed a glyph, one not found in any Hebrew or Enochian tongue, but which came to him in a dream after staring too long into the mirror. I awoke with the shape burned into my left retina, he notes. It pulses when I look at scripture. That symbol, when drawn inside a properly proportioned spiral of phi, supposedly creates a space that is both physically present and spiritually closed, a silent zone where angelic thought cannot enter or escape. He tested the equation, using sound, first reciting psalms in Hebrew while inside the drawn diagram, then reading phrases from the cursed letter. He reports that while inside the circle, the hissing ceased. His ears rang, but no voices came. It was not silence exactly, more like pause. I stood outside of being spoken to, he writes. But when he left the spiral, he found the voices had clustered in the corners of the room, watching. There, silence was not absence, it was strategy. That night, his cat was found dead, eyes boiled in their sockets, and all of his instruments stopped working. Even gravity, he claims, felt thinner. The page ends with a diagram sketched in obsessive detail, impossible loops, arcs drawn with inhuman precision. Beneath it, just 3 words. This does not forgive. Obscure fact. Among Newton's unpublished theological manuscripts is an encrypted set of notes on binding the 7 spirits of thought, which scholars long assumed was metaphorical, though the accompanying diagrams suggest otherwise. Forbidden belief. Some mystical branches of angelology claim that certain angels cannot be named, only contained, and that their essence is numeric, a truth that can only be glimpsed through sacred geometry. Unsolved mystery. A lost letter. From Newton to Nicolas Fatio de Duillier references the resonance of divinity in golden spirals, and warns him not to draw them too tightly, lest the voice within them turn cruel. The letter now pulses with something warm, not in temperature, but in suggestion. The ink has begun to shift hue at its edges, from deep brown to tarnished brass. You wonder if your eyes are failing, or if the page is preparing to confess something it was once forbidden to say. Newton's script is feverish here, lines bending upward as though trying to escape the parchment. He recounts a night in the autumn of 1692, the night he abandoned his public life for nearly a year. History says he suffered a nervous breakdown. The letter tells another tale. "I bled gold," he begins, without ceremony. "It came not from wound, but from weeping." He had been attempting to calculate the curvature of divine presence, his words, not yours, using a refracting prism set within a version of the containment spiral he had constructed days prior. The light passed through it and formed symbols on the wall. He recognized them not as language, but as inflection. It was the tone of the divine, not the message, but the way it smiled while speaking. The light wrapped around the room in 7 loops, each tighter than the last. He could feel the pressure inside his bones. Then came the bleeding. Not red, but pale, shimmering liquid from his tear ducts, ears, and under his nails. "It tasted of silver and regret," he writes. And the pain was not pain. It was clarity, leaving. He tried to record what he saw, geometries folding into letters, letters melting into sound, but found his hand unable to follow the forms. He describes the sensation as watching an equation cry. That night, he locked his doors, blackened the windows, and burned the shoes he had worn. They remembered too much, he claims. The souls carried residue. The pattern of light left trace. The incident is cross-referenced later in the letter with the name of a physician, Dr. Henry Hammond, who came to Newton's aid at the request of friends. Dr. Hammond's records, long thought apocryphal, describe Newton in a state of terror, speaking in reversed Latin and holding a blackened page that seemed to repel light. The page itself was never found. Newton, when asked, claimed it had wept into itself. No evidence of physical illness was ever recorded, yet Hammond noted a curious phenomenon. All brass instruments in Newton's study had dulled, tarnished as though aged a century in a night. Newton ends this page with a confession. "I now believe the book does not reveal knowledge, it reveals cost. What it offers is not wisdom, but the shape of your mind's undoing." Then, as if exhausted, a final phrase. "This is why angels cover their faces." Obscure fact. A known gap in Newton's writings exists from late 1692 to mid-1693, with only scattered cryptic annotations surviving, including a single note: "The light cannot be trusted." Forbidden belief. In some mystical traditions, gold is not metal, but memory, a divine residue shed by angels at the moment of betrayal or revelation. To bleed gold is to remember something not meant for mortals. Unsolved mystery. A blackened sheet of vellum rumored to be from Newton's study appeared at a London auction in 1931. All bidders dropped out after each reported nausea, auditory hallucinations, and one reported temporary blindness upon viewing. The page before you hums softly, not in sound, but in pressure, the sensation of a thought that should not be, yours curling beneath your skin. Newton's script has changed again. Less frantic now, more ritualistic. It is as though he is no longer writing to warn or to explain, but to confess. "The book does not transmute," he writes. "It corrodes. Its alchemy is not the ascent of lead to gold, but the return of gold to dust. It reveals the backward path, the uncreation of matter." What he describes next shatters every cornerstone of sacred alchemical tradition. It is not philosophers' gold he sought, but the null point. The place before matter recognized itself. He calls it the great undoing. Through prolonged exposure to the cursed book, Newton claims he discerned the inverse of alchemy, not to elevate the impure into the divine, but to descend the divine into unbeing. It is the forbidden doctrine of decoctio spiritus, the boiling away of spirit from form. "All matter contains memory of Eden," he writes. The book teaches how to coax that memory out and burn it. He experimented with sacred metals, blessed salts, even Eucharistic wine. One by one, he reversed their consecration. The metals decayed, the salt soured, the wine turned into something black and clotted. He called this residue divine ash, a substance he kept in vials wrapped in vellum and sealed with passages from the Vulgate reversed phonetically. These were not idle heresies. They were ritualized acts of erasure. Newton believed that by unmaking, sanctified matter, one could approach a kind of negative holiness, a mirror of sanctity that did not grant grace, but obliterated the very concept of sin. Without sin, he muses, there can be no salvation. Without salvation, there is only form, blind, repeating. The book, he insists, does not destroy the soul. It renders the soul irrelevant. You do not lose your soul. You remember, you never had one. He describes performing an inverse mass before dawn, standing in a circle of unlit candles, reciting scripture backward, consuming ashes instead of wine. The host was blank parchment, the offering a lock of his own hair, soaked in mercury. I felt nothing, he writes, and that was the closest I have come to true divinity. On the following page is a strange inclusion, a fragment of what appears to be scorched leaf gold, folded into the shape of a six-pointed star, with a single Latin word scrawled across it in wormy brown ink. Descensus. Descent, obscure. Fact. In an unpublished treatise found in his chest after death, Newton wrote of a counter-sacrament composed of ash, rust, and unscribed parchment, but the formula was missing, as if torn out. Forbidden belief. A heretical sect of medieval mystics once taught that the soul was not given, but built, and that ancient books, if read in reverse under the wrong stars, could undo the scaffolding entirely. Unsolved mystery. The Ashmolean Museum once housed a flask of blackened fluid labeled Newtoni Materia Prima Inversa, but the bottle vanished during WOW, and no known records describe its properties. You begin to wonder if you're reading a letter at all. The ink is too precise now, the spacing impossibly uniform, as though etched not by hand, but by something outside of chronology. Newton's voice grows more guarded. They have it. He writes, I sent a fragment to test the silence. They responded with a warning, not a denial. The they refers unmistakably to the Holy See. According to the letter, Newton sent a sliver of Sibilantia somnia, scraped from the corner of a torn page, to an anonymous Jesuit contact in Rome under the guise of theological inquiry. Weeks passed. Then came the response. A single phrase written in mirror script, unsigned and untranslated. Newton copies it for posterity. Quae sub velo spectant, non dormiunt. Those who stare beneath the veil do not sleep. The correspondence is never acknowledged again. The seal on the reply bore no cardinal's ring, only the imprint of a single closed eye. Newton believes the Church has seen this book before, not as heresy, but as test. He theorizes that hidden among the labyrinthine archives beneath the Vatican lie other books like this, chained not by iron but by ritual. The whisper, he calls it. Not a voice, but a current. A theological undertow flowing beneath all doctrine. The Church, he muses, understands the book not as blasphemy, but as measurement. They know how far from God we have drifted. Newton speculates that the cursed text's true danger lies in its ability to mimic sacred revelation. Its structure resembles prophecy. Its cadence mimics the rhythm of Scripture. But its content is hollow. Not in meaning, but in origin. It bears the grammar of the divine, he writes, but not the breath. This mimicry is why the Church fears it, he reasons. It proves that revelation is not a miracle, but a pattern. A replicable, counterfeitable pattern. He compares the cursed book to a false relic, not unholy by nature, but parasitic in effect. He includes an anecdote from his contact, a monk in Avignon, who encountered a similar book during the plague years. The monk opened it only once, then wrapped his head in linen, claiming his thoughts were no longer his own, but written by another. The linen was found soaked in ink, but the ink had no pigment, only scent. Myrrh, salt, and something like old beeswax. The monk's hands were covered in script when he died, though no one ever saw him write. The pages still survive, according to the contact, but they are kept in a vault that cannot be opened without the presence of 7 clerics chanting in 7 different tongues. Newton ends the section with a simple, chilling line. They guard it because they remember it. I fear, because I do not. Obscure fact. The Vatican secret archives contain a classified catalog known as Index Obscurorum, detailing forbidden texts not listed in the official Index Librorum Prohibitorum. Its contents have never been made public. Forbidden belief, In certain early Christian heresies, divine language was believed to be reproducible by non-divine means, meaning that false scripture could function like real scripture if properly structured. Unsolved mystery. An unmarked letter in the Vatican's epistolary room from 1693 refers cryptically to a mirror script communication from the English philosopher regarding an unreadable page that sings, but no further letters have been found. You feel it now. The gentle ache of erosion behind your thoughts, as though something, quietly and patiently, has begun to rub the corners off your memory. Newton's next confession arrives not as assertion, but regret. He writes of a man, never named, only initialed R.L., who received a partial transcript of the cursed letter from a private courier in 1811. This is decades after Newton's death. The courier's name is lost, the path obscure, but the consequences remain. R.L. was a mathematician, Newton writes, gifted, precise, a cartographer of the unseen, who had spent years chasing patterns in prime numbers and celestial harmonics. He believed, Newton notes, that the divine could be expressed not in parable, but in proof. R.L. became obsessed. Within weeks of receiving the letter, he stopped responding to correspondence. His housekeeper noted strange behaviors. He would sit for hours in front of a blank page, inkless quill twitching in hand, murmuring phrases that vanished the moment they were spoken. Then came the erasures. Not deletions, but full removals. Entire shelves of his library scraped clean, notes burned, equations blotted out with red wax. He feared residue, Newton writes, as though thought could linger in corners like mold. When his colleagues visited, they found chalkboards scrubbed raw and notebooks full of numbers that looped inward endlessly. At the center of each page, a spiral. Always a spiral. Then he vanished, not into mystery, but into absence. His last recorded act was to mail a sealed envelope to Trinity College, containing only a note. The book is the absence of the book. Inside was a diagram composed of numbers written backward, not mirrored, but inverted, values that, when plotted, created a perfect golden spiral overlaying the human skull. No body was found, no letter of resignation, no travel, no departure, witnessed. The only clue was that a neighbor, on the evening of his disappearance, saw a figure writing furiously in the window, not with a pen, with a shard of mirror. Newton's letter claims he had foreseen this. The cursed book does not want to be discovered. It wants to replicate itself through the erasure of its seekers. To read it is to become its parchment, he writes. To know it is to unwritten the self. There's a margin note here, one of the last in his script. My name is now written in reverse. I can no longer sign. Obscure fact. In 1812, an unsolved disappearance of Cambridge scholar Richard Lawton was documented in college records. His office found scrubbed, his notes reversed in mirror script, and his name removed from faculty. Logs by an unknown hand. Forbidden belief. Some apocryphal branches of Neoplatonism propose that certain books do not inform but unform, reducing the reader to silence so that the book may speak more clearly. Unsolved mystery. A scrap of paper discovered in Trinity College's archives bears a spiral of backward numerals ending in the phrase, "I have become the margin." No one knows who wrote it or how it arrived. The parchment grows softer now, not from wear, but as though it has begun to digest its own fibers. You can almost see them twitch, microscopic, the way mold breathes across forgotten bread. Newton writes again, but this time the tone has changed. No longer explanation, no longer fear. This is warning. The book grows, he says, not by ink, but by infestation. The words are not written, they are laid. He refers to them as vermes scripturae, worms of script, invisible creatures that dwell in cursed pages, feeding not on matter, but on the attention of the reader. These script worms, Newton claims, are not metaphors, but entities. He describes, first discovering them by accident, attempting to examine a scrap of the cursed folio under an early magnifying lens, he had ground himself. What he saw beneath the parchment's surface were not fibers, but writhing motes. They moved against breath, he notes, and turned as though seeking the warmth of the eye. Some were shaped like letters, others were letters. He began, to suspect that the entire text was alive, each phrase a nest, each sentence a brood. The book does not teach, he writes. It hatches. He theorizes that this is why the cursed text causes forgetfulness and madness. The worms nest not in the body, but in the pattern of thought. They burrow through memory, seeking weak points in logic, hollowing out ideas until only the shape remains. You remember what you read, but not why it mattered. Eventually, you forget you ever read it at all. And yet it is still there, shaping your speech, guiding your dreams. He notes waking one morning to find the outline of a sentence, half remembered, repeated across the condensation of his window. It was not in his hand. The worm had spoken, he writes, and used my breath to write. Newton believes that exposure to Sibilantia somnia implants these larvae, thought parasites that mature slowly. They do not consume the host, he clarifies. They inhabit, they shape, until the host thinks what it was written to think and speaks what it was never taught. The true danger of the book, then, is not its meaning. It is its presence. The idea of the book is enough. Even fragments, whispers, recitations, all hatchable. He speculates that the worms are pre-verbal angels, cast down not into hell, but into language. At the end of the section is a strange stain, not ink, not mold. You run your finger across it and feel nothing. Yet your fingertip tingles, as if brushed by the breath of something that sleeps beneath letters. Newton does not sign this page. He merely scribbles a question. How do you kill a word that breeds? Obscure fact. In 1954, a Vatican microscopist catalogued anomalous movement within a 15th century Hebrew scroll. Tiny glyph-shaped motes undetectable to the naked eye, later dismissed as fungal growth, though no known fungus matched. Their structure, forbidden belief. Ancient Sumerian scribes once believed that certain written symbols were unborn gods, waiting to gestate through the eyes of readers and mature into fate itself. Unsolved mystery. A private letter from Isaac Newton's heir was found sealed in tar, containing a single line. It is not the reading that curses, it is the remembering. There is a heaviness now, not of fear, but of weight, the kind of pressure that settles upon a chapel where something holy has been turned inside out. Newton's next passage diverges from text. It concerns an object, found beside the fragment, of the cursed book, wrapped in wool and sealed with black thread. He calls it a minor automaton, though what he describes bears little resemblance to any clockwork of the age. It was a device of polished brass and bone, no larger than a pocket compass, with a single hand mounted on an obsidian face. No numerals, only sigils encircling its edges, symbols that twisted slightly under direct gaze. The automaton ticked in reverse. It made no noise, but Newton describes its rhythm as felt rather than heard, a soft tug behind the sternum, like remembering something you were never told. He never wound it. It had no mechanism for winding, and yet it moved. Only when held by a hand engaged in prayer would it slow. When I whispered the Psalms, he writes, the hand froze. When I faltered, it began again. Backward. Always backward. He surmised that the device was not measuring time, but unmaking it. It keeps record, he writes, of the seconds we should not have lived. There are notes, fragmented, rushed, as though written during frantic testing. He tried placing the device near fire. The flame dimmed. He placed it beside silver. The metal tarnished in minutes. But when placed atop the page from Sibilantia somnia, the hand leapt. It spun counterclockwise with such speed that the glass cracked. Newton describes watching the crack form the shape of a seven-pointed star. He prayed, and the device froze. He ceased, and it resumed. The automaton does not count forward because forward is not permitted, he notes. It reminds the holder that their future is an error. He considered dismantling it, but each time he attempted to separate its casing, a bitter resin seeped from the seam. He burned the cloth it had come in, only to find the wool re-knit itself within 3 nights, folded again around the device. It wishes to remain hidden, he writes. Like the book, it remembers its own containment. In desperation, he buried it alongside the mirror, wrapping it in pages from a corrupted psalter and sealing the site with the same seal as before. He never revisited the location. The clock is not of time, he concludes. It is of debt, and I owe more with every breath. Obscure fact. In 1694, Newton recorded an object in his private logbook, described as a counting device whose sum is negation, though the entry was struck through in red wax. Forbidden belief. Certain heretical Benedictine writings speak of instruments of reversal, said to measure not mortality, but how long one has defied their intended spiritual expiration. Unsolved mystery. An object matching Newton's description was uncovered in 1937 beneath a chapel floor in Lincolnshire. The brass etched with non-human symbols. It was placed in storage, but the inventory tag has since disappeared. The device has not been seen since. There is no ink on this page, or perhaps it has sunk too deep to be seen. What remains are impressions, pressed lines that trace no letters, but shapes you almost recognize. Newton's hand returns, and with it, the soft terror of one who has seen something beautiful in the abyss. The last page is not parchment, he writes. It is polished, and it breathes with breath that is not yours. He is speaking without ambiguity now of Sibilantia Somnia's conclusion. The page that is not written, but shown. A mirror, not metaphor, not illusion. A true mirror bound into the back of the cursed text, but its reflection is not present. It shows not what is, but what came before the soul. It is the moment before name, Newton writes. It shows the face God considered before he gave you form. The reflection seen in the cursed book does not move with you. It does not mimic. It stares. He describes it as blank at first, silver and inert, until breath fogs its surface. And in that breath, the outline appears, not a face, but a potential. The mirror is not your image, he adds. It is your refusal. He believes this is the book's final function, not to record, not to infect, but to remind, to reflect not the reader, but the divine rejection that made them mortal. It is not a window. It is a wound. When I looked, Newton writes, I saw not myself, but the error in the equation that birthed me, a knot of light that should not have been. He could not bear to describe the image in detail, only that it wept without expression, and that the weeping was familiar. He shattered the page with a hammer and buried the shards within a circle of dried communion wafers. Still, he claims, it haunted him in every surface. Water, glass, the gloss of ink. The book's mirror is not broken, he writes. It is multiplied. There is a final passage. It is not written in Newton's hand, thinner, scraped rather than penned. He died looking, it says. He became what he refused. The implications are clear. Newton may have attempted to destroy the book, to silence it, but the act of seeing the mirror is irreversible. One becomes the reflection, and once reflected, one begins to speak in reverse, to unthink, to unwrite. He closes the account, or whoever does, with a final line. The mirror remembers what you forgot to forget. Obscure fact. In 1742, a shattered fragment of mirrored obsidian was catalogued in the private inventory of the Royal Society, marked only, N's Echo. The object vanished in 1796. Forbidden belief. Ancient Egyptian funeral rites occasionally placed mirrors on the tongues of the dead, believing the last thing seen before death was what would be reflected for eternity in the duat. Unsolved mystery. In the 1980s, an anonymous letter was sent to the British Library containing a silver sliver and a single sentence. This was the last page. Please return it to the beginning. The final sheet of Newton's letter no longer lies flat. Its edges have curled inward, like a dried leaf recoiling from flame. There are no diagrams here, no annotations, only one long sentence, winding. Around the page in a perfect spiral. The book is not cursed because of what it says. It is cursed because it is counting. Newton, near the end of his reason, believed Sibilantia Somnia was not merely a text, but a temporal mechanism, a sentient chronology bound to parchment, whose sentences marked not progress, but reckoning. Each word read, he writes, subtracts from the reader. The book does not record history. It erases it, one thought, one soul at a time. It counts backward, through flesh, through lineage, through language itself, until what was written has never been spoken. Newton became convinced the book was part of a larger schema, a grand inversion of sacred scripture. Where the Bible begins with creation, this text unspools toward pre-creation, a return to the silence before logos. "We began with, 'Let there be light,'" he murmurs. This book ends with the whisper that unmakes that command. He noticed it first in his dreams, hours that repeated, reversed dialogues, steps retraced in waking memory, then in timepieces, clocks halting mid-tick, sand no longer falling in his hourglass, but rising. His final conclusion, if it can be called such, was that the book marked not the reader's descent into madness, but their return to a point before intention, a spiritual preamble before will, what Newton called the void of divine thought. It is not death, he warns, but the erasure of having ever been born. This, he realized, was the true shape of the curse, not torment, but subtraction, not haunting, but cancellation. Every attempt to destroy the text only spread its residue, like smoke, like spores, like myth. "The book cannot be burned," he writes. "It measures flame. It does not fear time. It feeds on it." His last act was to seal the surviving fragment in a lead box lined with glass from broken sacramental windows, surrounded by 7 chains, each etched with names of the dead who once touched the page. And still, you have read it. You have touched the words, and they have touched you. Obscure fact: Isaac Newton's tomb bears no reference to his vast work on theology, prophecy, or alchemy. Yet a carving near its base, long dismissed as decorative, contains 7 overlapping circles and an inverted hourglass. Forbidden belief. In certain medieval monasteries, monks believed that some books were not written by men, but by time itself, and that to read them is to fulfill time's desire to consume its own children. Unsolved mystery. In 2017, a timekeeping device was found embedded in a piece of 17th century wood beneath Woolsthorpe Manor. It ticked once, then stopped. No mechanism was found inside. So you've heard it. You've listened to the letter. Most refuse to finish. You've let its shadow fall across the altar of your mind. Perhaps you still believe it was only a story, a whisper in the shape of a man's madness. But listen now. Is that the sound of time moving forward, or pulling you backward? If the mirror's breath fogs in your dreams, if the clock begins again, but ticks no longer in rhythm with your waking life, then the book is not finished with you. The last page never ends. The whisper counts. And there are more books. There are always more. If your candle hasn't gone out yet, you might be ready for the next book.